Hello and welcome to Sanford Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. Today, I'm excited to welcome Gaspar Nagy. Gaspar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Darko.
Great. Can you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I think if you are asking me now, then I should have said that I'm a half developer, half tester. But actually, my background is software development. So I was studying computer science and worked as a developer for many years. But a couple of years ago, I started to get introduced by behavior-driven development. We will talk about that for sure quite much. And that was basically bringing me also to the testing part. I think testing, at least at that time, definitely was a little bit undervalued part of software development, and maybe still that today. And so I was really excited to see what kind of hidden knowledge, or at least hidden to me, knowledge out there. So I was happy to learn about all these things. And nowadays I'm trying to combine these two forces. One of my goals is to make the connection between developers and testers and development and testing in general a little bit closer.
Great. And during that journey, you also created SpecFlow?
Yes. So SpecFlow is basically my baby, but it was just created by coincidence. So we wanted to try out BDD, and there was no good tooling for .NET, and we were eager to see whether the methodology itself works or not. So I was just putting together a small tool that was mimicking more or less how Cucumber works, but a little bit more adjusted to the .NET ecosystem or the people who use Visual Studio and such. Then we decided to make it open source. I think that was a great decision by the company. And since then, it started its own life. And nowadays, it's used by many people.
Yeah. Great. That's good contribution. Every community, .NET and other ones always need those people who are going to light the fire in that domain.
Definitely. This was my first open source project. So basically, I was learning how open source works together with SpecFlow. And I think that was definitely a great journey.
Great. And can you explain to us how that introduction to BDD world worked for you, and what was the moment when it really clicked and you just felt, okay, this is kind of my career path going to be?
So the time where we are talking about is like 2008, 2009. And at that time, at least here in this part of Europe, the agile concept, Scrum and test-driven development and some of these were relatively new, and we didn't have too much experience with that. So with my colleagues, we were basically trying out how these things work. We tried to set up some sprints, we tried to set up user stories and all the other things. And we also tried to do much more automated testing than we did before. Basically, it was, I think, a natural extension of the more flexibility that we got with the user stories and the Scrum process. I think we had to compensate that somehow with a little bit more automated tests. However, what we have seen that concept-wise, I think all these things looked really great, and there were no problem with understanding that these things have value. But when we had to turn it into practice, it wasn't that easy. So we have made also integration tests or system tests, and those tests were growing quite big. And there was a little pause on the project or whatever. We had to come back to the project half a year later or a year later. When we looked at the tests, it was very hard to understand them. And if they started to fail, it was very hard to fix them. So altogether, it wasn't really a nice experience, especially if you had to continue improving the product, add new features whatsoever. So the maintenance of those tests were not good enough, let's say it like that. And we were talking a lot about that, how we could do that. And we didn't have a clear answer, but we have identified that we would like to be able to make our tests better understandable. We would like to better separate what we wanted to test and how we did the testing, because so far it was all in the code. And we were trying different approaches, like maybe putting some comments into the code that in these 4 lines, I'm basically creating an order, or that 3 lines is logging in a user. But that requires too much discipline, and I think developers are typically not disciplined enough for that. And also for the maintainability, it wasn't good enough. So we were trying to see how we could make this even more enforced, that separation of the testing concern from the automation concern. And we even started to make some tooling for that. And fortunately, we haven't spent too much time with that new tooling, because then we have seen that there is Cucumber out there, which is more or less doing what we wanted to do, and it's already there. So we thought that instead of making our own tool, let's just use the concept that was introduced by Cucumber. And we started to play with that. And because of these technology constraints, we switched on to SpecFlow or created SpecFlow. But since then, we were doing quite many BDD projects. And on those projects, we tested a little bit how this kind of model or how this kind of method works. And even though that we started from the testing understandability point of view, actually the more projects we made, it became more clear that the earlier you start thinking in scenarios, or the earlier you start the BDD process, so to say, the better it becomes. And even after many years, we still recognize some new things about basic things like user story. So what different aspects of user story really mean, those become much more understandable when we were able to put it into a full process.
Semaphore now understands your tests. With the new test reports feature, your team now has a unified report of all the parallel jobs in your CI/CD pipeline. Get a single test report for the whole pipeline, see filtered and skipped tests on the test dashboard, and find the slowest tests in your test suite. Learn more at semaphoreCI.com/test reports.
Yeah, frameworks for thinking and communicating really help, especially as teams are growing and changing and so on. And then eventually you, at some point, realize that helping other people and companies embrace the BDD as the process, understand, the best practices of using it and so on. So can you maybe talk a bit about that transition that you made and how that happened and what's maybe the current state of, your coaching business in general?
Yeah. So definitely BDD helps the communication and the collaboration in the company where I have been. And as I said, because of the structure of the company, I had a chance to not necessarily fully participate, but at least overview quite many projects. So we get a fair amount of experience, not necessarily good experience, of course, also bad ones. So it was the natural extension to start doing trainings, because why not share the things that we have got? And I was anyway doing trainings even before, so I like to do that basically. And I think 6 years ago, the training aspect and all of the coaching, BDD related coaching that I was doing, conference sessions, many other things, just became too much. And it was very hard for me to do two things in parallel, being at a company and doing my software developer, software architect duties, plus doing this BDD evangelism, if you want to call it like that. So I decided to quit from the company and started my own business. And basically what I'm doing nowadays is helping teams, helping clients to introduce BDD, to do better BDD, or to help them with some sort of challenges that they run into if they do BDD. BDD is a big umbrella, so there is a lot of things under that. Obviously, communication and understanding of the requirements is one big part. But of course, test automation challenges are also very common and very much in my focus. I'm anyway interested in that topic, because typically teams who start to do BDD, they are doing two things at the same time, trying to use a better collaboration platform, plus probably they try to do better testing, better automated testing as well. And some of the automated testing challenges are basically shown up, or looks like they are BDD challenges. Probably they would have anyway be shown up without BDD as well. I think these are all interesting ones, and I'm trying to help them in these topics.
Clear. And as you said, you joined this, let's say, adventure in 2008, roughly. And now we are like, many years later. What's your assessment based on the sample of the companies that you are working on and developers in general that you are talking with in the state of BDD? How widespread it is? Is it at the level that you kind of want it to be? Or there are still so many people that are completely unaware of the BDD and the benefits and so on?
When I started that in 2009, I didn't thought that 10 or 15 years later, I will still deal with that. So I think it's a positive surprise. And it's also visible that in the beginning, I think it was more a topic of small, agile companies. But as the agile thinking and software development processes got into the enterprise sector as well, many of them also realized that they need to have a more transparent or more structured way of testing. And many of them find BDD, because I think there are not so many alternatives. I mean, of course, you can do many different things, but I think BDD is a key player there. And I think nowadays, this is what we see, so that more and more enterprises are adopting BDD, but it's still in the adoption phase. So I think it's not near to finish. And there are a lot of companies who are still just thinking about that, or just evaluating, or maybe doing some pilot projects in this topic.
And you mentioned enterprises, which definitely means bigger teams and so on. As you're helping them and you're coming into the company and, as you said, evangelizing on the BDD topics, what are some of the typical things that you are seeing in terms of adoption? What are some of the challenges? Where are the areas where you really have to push and repeat multiple times and to help that work out?
I think people generally got the message that what we would like to do with BDD, and having a better understandability of the requirements, working through them in a more structured way, creating automated tests that have the link back to the requirements so they are traceable. I think the core message is somehow okay with them. Typically, the problems are partly cultural things, especially with the test automation. I think test automation is an interesting topic, and many of the developers are still harder to accept that.
They don't want to write tests.
Yeah, they think that they are good enough so that they don't need tests. And I can partly understand that, because I was also growing up in this kind of thinking, and I was considering myself as a good developer generally. And I had many times surprises that even though that I was 100% sure that that works, I was 100% sure that I was thinking it over several times, and it was still failing. So I learned to not trust myself, but that's something that you have to learn, and that's a longer journey that have to be made. And at some companies, some of the key players in the team are resistant, then it's much harder. And of course, the other key challenge is that is about collaboration. So it doesn't work, or it's not really showing all the benefits. Only the dev team, for example, is adapting that, but the business is not really able or can or want to participate. So they have to find the right time when this can be introduced. I think with any kind of improvement in the process, if you have tight deadlines and whatever, it's very hard to make a pause, make a test period of 2-3 sprints to see how this would work, and then make the conclusions. Typically, they are just trying it out, and after 2 days, they maybe give up that, okay, we will never have time for that. But you need to do it a little bit more longer to make it faster, let's say it like that. Therefore, sometimes this is what blocks the adoption, that they don't have that time to really do this improvement.
Yeah, and since you probably had these conversations many times, if a force for adopting BDD or generally more testing culture comes, bottom up from the developers, and then they need to persuade their team leads and leadership, to give them essentially the budget, time to embrace that and push it forward. Do you have maybe some advice for them how to pitch it to their leadership and how to communicate the benefits and what to ask for actually?
I think I have observed that at smaller companies, of course, my statistics are absolutely not proper, but I have seen that in many bigger companies, it's rather the opposite. So it's the management who would like to push it. But anyway, both direction is important. So if you see the bottom-up approach, so when the dev team sees that there might be some value and they would need to convince the management to do that, then I think with any kind of approaches, it's very important to find what are the pain points for the business and try to see how this process will help to avoid those problematic areas. So business is business driven. So just that you say that we are doing BDD and that's a great sounding methodology and there are some nice guys behind that, that's no value. And even just saying that we are now writing our test using give and then, again, that's no value. The value is whether we are able to provide better coverage, requirement coverage, traceability, whether we can do better predictions on our progress because we are doing some functional progress here, or we will have less production issues because we have a better understanding of the requirements, or any kind of things related to that. These are the values. But for them, the first thing that you need to see that, okay, what is problematic? What is the thing that we would need to fix and improve in that particular company? And maybe it will come out that it's hard to hire new people, or it takes a lot of time to train the new people into our product. And then you can see that, okay, look, now we have a structured testing where our tests are business readable. So if someone would like to better understand how our system works for this particular feature, then they can make a code book starting from a test. And through that, they can learn into how the system works. And now it's not a big black box for them, but at least some parts of them they can unfold and look into that. And I think that's a good response. And I think the business will understand that, or if not, then at least it will be easier to convince that let's give it a try. Let's see how this would work. Let's try it for 2 months. Let's make some measures, what we would like to see, and let's see how much value this is producing for us. So that's what I was also doing, or I'm also doing, and that's what I can suggest to anyone, that try to think with their heads and see where they see the benefits. Typically, BDD is a methodology like that provides benefits in multiple different areas. So maybe for a developer, they will like it for a different reason than why the business will like it, but that's all good.
Semaphore now understands your tests. With the new test reports feature, your team now has a unified report of all the parallel jobs in your CI/CD pipeline. Get a single test report for the whole pipeline, see filtered and skipped tests on the test dashboard, and find the slowest tests in your test suite. Learn more at semaphoreCI.com/test reports.
Companies can be very different, various sizes, various cultures that exist, and so on. But can you give us something that would be a good example of when you come in to work with a team? How do you generally structure? What's the duration and what's the agenda that you are going through with the team, and how your teaching and consulting works?
Yeah, of course, it can be different in different situations. But what I like to do is to try to go through with a few user stories, so to say, end to end. Usually we do some sort of preliminary training thing, which is just go through in theory, of course, also in practice, but not in their domain, how BDD works. And then take a user story from their own domain, maybe one that they will start to work on next week anyway, and try to analyze the user story with the methods, with the tools that we are using typically with BDD. Try to find rules, try to find examples, try to formulate those examples to BDD scenarios, and try to push it through so that we also get automated tests from that. And then what we are seeing based on this concrete example, of course, we can modify or extend, so that there's obviously a feedback and review process. And then trying out with another user story. Typically, teams have different kinds of user stories, but how many different kinds of user stories they have is quite much limited. So after doing the 4th or 5th user story, then basically we have a quite nice coverage of different kinds of problems that they can see. And then we will have at least some concrete solutions in our head that we can work on and see what kind of results they produce. So that's the typical approach. So there is this initial period where we are trying to make some sort of pilot project. It's not even a project, it's probably just a couple of features that we look into, and then let's see what we can get out of them. Typically, the companies have two fears. One fear is that they have seen on the internet quite many calculator scenarios and basic pizza selling website projects where it looks great, but typically their business is much more complex than that. So how that complexity can be managed. And the other is the timing, so that how much time this will take from there and how much they are going to be slower because of applying BDD. So that's the two typical fears, absolutely understandable fears that they have. And going through some concrete examples of their own domain is helping at least to see how to manage the complexity. And the speed is something which takes a little bit more time to get to, because of course initially everything is much slower, but it gets faster. And I think at least that was my perception, that altogether a project done with BDD shouldn't take longer than a project done without BDD if you are aiming the same quality.
Yes, exactly.
So if you feel that it slows you down, then something is wrong. Then you are not comparing it with the same thing, or you need to improve your process and see why it is feeling slow.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. And over time, you should become, faster and more confident, and all of those other good things. And taking something, as you said, that they might work on next week is a great thing because people can relate to that. And okay, as you said, it's not calculator; it's my feature actually that I'll need to work on.
Exactly. And all these things, even though that typically it's not really emphasized with BDD, but one of the things that BDD is good for is to help you to decompose the problem, which is generally one of the biggest challenges in software development. You have a huge complex problem and you don't know how to make it into smaller chunks. And without making it smaller chunks, you will not be able to test it. So it's also a testability problem, but it's also a coding problem as well, and also a progress problem as well. So being able to decouple the problem and define some smaller achievable goals is very valuable in any way. And basically that's what drops out of the BDD process typically.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And in practice, do you use like a pair programming or mob programming? What's your approach with working with people in the team?
I think, or at least my practice was like that I like to combine pair or mob programming with doing it alone a little bit, kind of. So there should be a combination. I think pair programming and mob programming is very good to set the starting points, but people also need some time to do that in their own pace. And it's another form of learning, probably, when you have to make the decisions alone. Of course, if it's well surrounded with some review steps and review opportunities, that there is no big risk doing these things alone. But basically, that's my approach. I try to do some hands-on things together with them, then letting them doing it alone, then reviewing the things, getting on and off. Basically, that was working for me at least.
Yeah, yeah, clear, clear. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we went through a number of projects that you were involved in. Let's call them projects, from SpecFlow to the books that you're writing in your newsletter and so on. But there is also a project that we talked about. It's called SpecSync, right?
Yes.
Which is interesting. Can you maybe talk a bit about the background and what's the problem that it solves?
SpecSync is a product. And basically, the idea of the product was coming from my discussions with the customers or the clients that I had. And many of them, especially bigger enterprises, need to have more stricter traceability, maybe because of legal reasons, because they are working in medical sector, or maybe because of some process related reasons. Let's say maybe they are working in a financial sector and they would like to really make sure that the things are properly covered. And of course, there are some tools that help you to maintain your process and your requirements, Azure DevOps, Jira, many other application lifecycle management tools. And the question for them was how to integrate the BDD scenarios into that and how to connect them to their existing work items requirements. And basically, SpecSync just started like a small synchronization tool where basically it can connect these scenarios into Azure DevOps, now also Jira tickets or work items, so that you can make some several connections and you can see all your artifacts in the same place. Again, this is more interesting for the transparency and for the traceability when the company itself is requiring that. So that's the project I was working on, which is very exciting because actually to be able to connect these scenarios to, let's say, Azure DevOps test case work items, they have to fit into the process of the company. So in many cases, I had interviews with the companies, learning about their processes and see how the synchronization can be solved in that particular case. So it contains a lot of special customization that is supporting some more tricky development processes that some of my clients required. And anyone who did such a tool, which is having some different aspects for different companies, it's a kind of a product that contains products itself with some detailed customization. They know that also from the testability point of view, this was a great challenge. So while doing SpecSync, I was able to keep my hands dirty, eating my own dog food, let's say it like that, so that do BDD scenarios for that and have a very nice, or at least I think it's a nice process at the end that I have there. And I learned a lot during that period as well.
Yeah, our line of work generally is like it keeps us exciting, being exciting if you're really keeping your hands dirty. at least a little bit. Otherwise, you could get disconnected from the practice, and that's never a good thing.
Yep.
Can you give us a couple of pointers for the people that would want to, learn more, and maybe also give a pitch to the books where we can find more about that and where people can find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest is the books. So with Seb Rose, we started to do this books project, I don't know how many years ago. But at the end, we decided that instead of making one big book about BDD, we make several shorter books about that. And currently we have 2 books ready. And the series is called BDD Books, easy to remember. And if you want to have the reference to that, it's bddbooks.com, easy to remember. And then you will have all the links to Amazon and Leanpub where you can get the books. So the 2 ones that are already out are the Discovery, which is basically talking about how the requirements should be structured in this BDD thinking way. And the second is the Formulation, how to write good BDD scenarios. That has a lot of useful practical things that we also learned with Seb in the projects where we have been using that, and we shaped it into a form of a book. And currently we are working on the 3rd book. I always wanted to have such a book for a long time. It will be about automation patterns. So the working title is like BDD Automation Patterns. And it will contain a little bit like the Gang of 4 book, the Design Patterns book. It will contain many different test automation patterns that work well with BDD examples. That book we will do with contribution of many other BDD practitioners who submitted their own patterns. And we will basically compile a book from that. It's a big work and we are still at the beginning, so I don't want to say any promise of the release date, but at least that's a very interesting topic though.
Yeah. I hope it will be as successful as like a Gang of 4 books and have such a cool name.
Yeah, within our own playground at least.
Yeah. That sounds great, because the books that I went through when I was coming to the BDD and TDD as a practice, I actually don't remember, having seen a nice collection of those patterns. And then from there also anti-patterns, how to do or not to do things. That reinventing the wheel is, not the best investment if there is a place where someone can learn those patterns.
Yes. I think generally there are not so many test automation related books out there.
Exactly.
And especially not pattern based. But I think patterns are super important for software development. And if you can say it like that, it's even more super important for test automation. So I think test automation is even more pattern oriented, or should be pattern oriented. And that's also a very good collaboration point with testers and developers. Maybe developers in your company help you to build up those patterns that you need to use. And maybe testers with a slightly less coding skills can nicely apply those patterns and help you to build up the test automation solution that you wish to have. So yeah, it's an important thing. So that's about the books. For my business, my company is called Spec Solutions. Everything starts with specs. SpecSolutions.eu is the URL, and there you will find all the connections to basically all of the things that I'm doing.
Great. Well, as you said, like, it's a big work, but good luck with the book, and I hope that it will come out very nicely. Thanks for all the stories that you shared and all the tips in the area. Yeah, again, Gaspar Nagy, and you can find more information about him and his work at the websites that he shared. Thank you again. Good luck.
Thank you very much for having the talk with me.